And I am the president and CEO of Concensus Technologies. Welcome to our discussion today on Universal Authentication Director with Identity Automation. For those of you who do not know us here at Concensus, what we do, we are an identity and access management first organization. We also have cybersecurity and cloud services that we provide, sales services and support. And we're going to focus today, obviously, on identity and access management because that's what identity automation does. So I just want to bring out the fact that we do support multiple identity and access management solutions and some of our cybersecurity solutions. And we do tailor those mostly to education customers. So we have a concept called the Concensus Cybersecurity Assistance Program. And under there, we can do things under cybersecurity such as penetration testing, vulnerability management, access, and things like that. So that's some of the stuff that we do here at Concensus. So just to talk a little bit more about the identity and access management that we do, we're going to focus a lot today on access management. That's what authentication and authorization is all about, and some of the challenges that we see at some of the schools that we work with. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. But obviously, identity and access management starts with that user lifecycle automation. We always talk about that. That's the thing that we do and the thing that brings a lot of bang for the buck for our customers. I think most of you that are on here that we've done work for over the years can attest that being able to take a student from the student information system and sync them all the way down into all your applications is worth its weight in gold. But we're going to take that to another level today and talk a little bit about how we can actually get that access management portion of your implementation going. We maintain top tier relationships with multiple vendors. Obviously, identity automations are our go-to when it comes to education customers because they've been doing this work for almost 20 years, and they've been focused on the education market for as long as they've been around. So with that said, the experience we have in higher education, we do a lot of colleges and universities across the country, K-12, and last year we started with the trade schools. Some of the trade schools that we have are starting to implement or being required to implement some kind of single sign-on solution, multi-factor authentication, on top of seeing the value in the identity and access management space. The last thing I'll mention here about Concensus, we do strategy, roadmaps, product selection, architecture, and design when it comes to identity management. So I'll do some introductions today. It's very simple. We're going to then talk about the Universal Authentication Director background, and then we'll go into a demo. So before I start with Carter here, I just want to mention the identity automation relationship. We've been working with identity automation for almost 3 years now. And again, I just mentioned why we like to get with identity automation and implement in our education customers. The focus that they have, the integrations that they have with student information systems, with other education learning management systems like Canvas and things like that. That time to implement with identity automation is so much easier in that environment. We love to use the identity automation as it's in the cloud now. I know we started a couple of years ago. There's still some on-premise implementations there, but you need to start taking a look at moving to the cloud. There's a lot more features in there, and we're going to obviously talk about Universal Authentication Director today, and that's going to be available in the cloud implementation there. So I want to introduce our two presenters today, Carter Dunbar, who's the Director of Business Development, and Kevin Satterfield, Solutions Architect with Identity Automation. Carter, it's good to have you again. I know we've done a couple webinars together, and it's a pleasure to be on here with you. So you want to talk to us a little bit about why Universal Authentication Director is so important?
Yeah, thanks for the setup, Don. And I just want to reiterate what Don was saying. We've been partnering with Concensus for coming up on 3 years now, and just super happy with the relationship. What Don was alluding to, they work with other IAM vendors, 100%. There are other IAM products and platforms that are out there that are fantastic tools. From an identity automation perspective, it's really more of a missional approach. So we have seen the education market as someone that is high value, high complexity, high user total, but underserved, mainly because the enterprise players don't want to take the time to sell into the education space. It's very complex and it's lower margin. For those of us at Identity Automation, that's the market that we specifically want to service because of the value that education brings society. So on a personal level for myself, education just runs in my family. So my mom runs a Montessori academy that goes from, it takes students as early as 6 weeks old up through 6th grade. I was a former high school teacher in a public school district here in Fort Worth, Texas, and my wife is a college professor. So as a family, we span the gambit from 6 weeks old to masters and doctorates. With that, it really is a missional approach because what we found from an identity automation perspective, education has a lot of pain and a lot of problems from a security standpoint, but the budget that's associated with it is not there to be able to really buy everything that you want to and need to that an enterprise customer would. So a typical district from a K-12 perspective is the same size as DoorDash from a business perspective, as far as number of users and things like that. But the revenue that's generated by it, the budget that's allocated for it, and the number of people working on the IT team is not at all the same as DoorDash. So for us, it is how do we specifically tailor our product for the education marketplace, for their use cases, for their data models, and make sure that education is served in a way that gets enterprise level solutions that are tailored specifically for them at a price that understands the education market. So setting that stage as far as who we are, why we are servicing the education market. One of the things historically that we have seen working in this industry is technology plans have been a bit piecemeal. So from 20 years on now, products, platforms, approaches to technology have been bolted on top of each other. The classroom has been seen as one thing, the back office has been seen as another thing, IT is its own thing. And from an authentication perspective, one of the challenges is in the last 8 years, the concept of single sign-on for the classroom has really taken off and gained just a lot of steam. The downside of that is it was effectively built to be an ease of use tool that was a pass-through for teachers and students to be able to access learning resources. Well, that's a subset of your ecosystem, both from the users that it touches, as well as the applications and systems that it is able to integrate with. So what districts have done is have multiple login places and even multiple SSO portals. So my teachers and students may log into something like Clever. My business office users may log into something like Azure, Office 365, or things of that nature. And as these disjointed strategies have collided with each other, the users get used to using what they use. So it's really, really difficult then for an IT leader to come in and say, what we need to do is scrap what we have done and consolidate everything into a single approach and a single platform, because that's ripping out the user experience that large portions of the user population are used to. And that level of change management in an academic institution is very, very difficult to manage. So that's one problem setting the stage that led us down this path. The other is MFA. So MFA is now a non-negotiable. Everybody on this call is aware of cybersecurity, insurance premiums, how the requirements and compliance from insurance carriers has spiked because of the threat of ransomware, data breaches, and cybersecurity attacks and incidents. So with that, education organizations are now faced with, I need to implement MFA. How do I implement MFA? From a higher ed perspective, it's how do I do it in an equitable way? And from a K-12 perspective, it's how can I do it in a way where I can have my privileged administrators be able to use MFA the same way as a third grader with a learning disability? How are we able to do it across that wide gambit? So being able to marry SSO and MFA, while protecting the user experience from a change management perspective is really the problem statement that we were brought to by our customer base. So hearing the needs of our customer, we ended up developing the ability to say, awesome, we don't want to monopolize eyes. What we want to do is help you secure your environment from an authentication perspective. As more and more of your ecosystem and infrastructure are moving to the cloud, the need for a zero trust approach is absolutely paramount. And with that, it comes down to a starting point of who are my users? What are they trying to access? Should they be accessing it? So with that, we need to funnel traffic into a single place so that we can lock it down and have identity-driven contextual authentication that then pushes them wherever it is that is appropriate for them. We've done that in two different ways. One is we have the concept that we call personas within our product. So from a portal perspective, every single identity that is stored within our rapid identity product is able to be categorized and evaluated based on who they are, what their needs are, and have a persona assigned to them. Based on that persona, their interaction with the technology is going to be different. And so Kevin's going to demonstrate that here in a little bit to show what that actually looks like. I'd much rather him show than me try to tell when it comes to the personas and what that means for your end users. But the concept of the Universal Authentication Director is we have a single login, which is the identity provider. It can be skinned to look like whatever you need so that the interruption to your end users is minimized as much as possible. But all your users then are funneled to one single point of authentication. And based on the persona assigned with that individual user, once they authenticate with the MFA policies that are appropriate for them, they will get directed based on the Universal Authentication Director to the portal experience that is appropriate for them. So you may have elementary school students, let's say, that get dropped off in something like a Clever or a ClassLink. You may have high school teachers and students get dropped off in Rapid Identity. You may have your IT users get dropped off in Azure. Either way, it's a seamless process to where they don't even understand that they're interacting with a single platform. They just think they're logging into the end experience that they are going into. So it really minimizes that change management that you then have to deal with from an IT perspective. So all of this is done with an eye towards allowing the individually tailored experience with technology that really the only way you can do that in a zero trust model is by taking an identity-centric approach to technology. And the ability to do that is by, as Don was talking about, having your identity and access management program in place, which is not a piece of technology. It's not a tool. It really is a holistic program that brings together what Don and I always talk about as your PPT. So your people, your processes, your technology. It's bigger than just a tool. It's bigger than a product. It's also bigger than an IT initiative. It really is a district-wide, a college-wide, a university-wide. It is an organizationally enterprise-driven approach to how your users are going to interact with technology and how your organization is going to secure all of that data that goes along with that. Don, before we jump into a demo, is there anything you want to specifically hop in with or ask?
I can tell you from an end user experience, my daughter's a freshman at Westminster College, just north of here, and she was automatically provisioned by identity automation. So no, I do want to say that, that whole talk about using, the different systems, we see people, customers really that have that, hey, my student information system has a login portal. This system integrates with Google, therefore we need to set up SAML integration with Google. And this cross, here and there, that really does become a problem for the end users. So having one place and one location for them to launch off of is kind of key. We've seen that too many times where we'll spend the time integrating. We even have some customers we've integrated Azure and Google together. And MFA between the two, but then the next thing that happens is, hey, we need to integrate with the student information system, or we need to integrate with this other just for authentication, and a number of MFAs that people have to get and jump through. It's really a problem. So Universal Authentication Director, we know, solves that problem. So With that said, I'm happy to turn it over to Kevin to show us.
Very, very well said, Don and Carter. Everybody, my name is Kevin Satterfield. I'm a solutions architect at Identity Automation that focuses on specifically authentication. I started out working with public safety and federal government institutions deploying two-factor authentication to meet NIST requirements. And at the time, it was CJIS for public safety. And now here we are full circle, and we're seeing the compliance requirements come into education. I think the major difference that we're seeing today is that we have the most diverse user base of really any of the environments and populations I've ever worked with within education. We have administrators, we have professors, we have faculty, we have teachers, and ultimately we have students, alumni, even guardians that need access to our resources. And like Don and Carter highlighted, one of the big struggles and pain points for people has been, how do I have a single point of authentication? And then one of the things that I've really spent a lot of time over the past 2 years talking to people about is, how do I actually implement this? How do I get adoption across my user base? And what we'll look at today is 3 different unique user experiences. We'll actually be interacting with the same rapid identity provider or tenant. So that's key to note here, is that every experience we see will be facilitated by a single rapid identity tenant. But we'll notice that each user experience is unique based off of their role in the institution, or maybe even attributes that you call out specifically that are tied to them within lifecycle. So we'll jump in and we will switch between 3 screens, and I will call out our user experience for each one. The first one we're going to take a look at is an administrative experience.
Hey,
so
Kevin, are you sharing your screen?
I'm about to.
Okay. Thanks.
What I love to see our names just up there in perpetuity, but should probably show somebody something, right? So first one we're going to pull up here, guys, is a administrative experience. And for the context of us today, everything we do from an admin experience, when I log in, we come back and look at the configuration of this, I'll be in a regular browser window. For the rest of our interactions, we'll actually use incognito windows. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to log in as an administrator. So I'm a power user. I leverage rapid identity to do all of my great lifecycle components and manage my users. And then I also maybe log into rapid identity for my own personal device. I leverage a MacBook. It's something that a lot of the developers and people on my team use. So why not take advantage of things like Touch ID or built-in biometric authentication, right? So when I come up to log in to my portal, right, we'll notice here that I bump into this IDP. Like Carter had mentioned, this is something that is completely brandable. So the look of this page, the feel of it, the buttons, the links, everything that you see here is something that you can own using custom HTML or custom CSS, right? So that's a big point of unifying that experience. It means whether I'm browsing directly to this, I get redirected to this, or maybe I'm even getting presented this from a Windows login screen. It's the same experience for our end users, so they know where to log into and what to provide. So the way it works for me as an administrator, right? So I come over here, I put in my username, and then I am prompted for WebAuthn authentication. In my scenario, I've pre-registered my Touch ID for my MacBook, so I'll go ahead and provide that. And I will gain access to a dashboard that is designed for administrators. We'll notice here I have access to all of the single sign-on applications that we provide through this environment. I can also gain access to any of the other administrative capabilities that I am provided through maybe role-based or attribute-based access control. We'll notice here that I can come over here, I can designate things on my profile. So if I want to edit certain things like my preferred method to log in, I can actually designate that here. Maybe I want to start using a push notification or TOTP instead of WebAuthn. I, as an administrator, can actually come right here and perform self-service to designate that, right? So this is a very powerful experience. When we talk about enforcing or meeting two-factor compliance, all I have to do in this scenario is combine one of these methods, right, with a NIST compliant password, and I've stamped that checkbox right away, and we have that two-factor compliance to log into any of my federated resources, right, like Gmail, O365, and ultimately anything that we use rapid identity to authenticate for. So this is the administrator experience. This is kind of what we're used to. This is the, the direct experience. I get right into a console and I start authenticating. Where we've really seen this evolve over the past years is how do we tailor this experience? How do we make it more user-friendly? How do we fit specific user groups and roles that maybe aren't as technical, right? How do I provide this same level of security and single sign-on capability to maybe a teacher, right? So we'll go ahead and we'll look at another experience here, right? So we're shifting away from the administrative experience, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to look at what it's like to be a teacher. The key here, right, is that I'm seeing the same page that I saw as an administrator. I'm getting redirected here. I'm browsing directly here, right? This is the same page. It is universal, whether I'm coming from a browser, a Windows device, a Chromebook, an iPad, right? It is a universal experience for me as the end user. And when we talk about teachers and ultimately students, that goes a long way. Like Carter mentioned, I think a lot of us are either directly involved with teachers or we have relatives or family members, right, that have teaching lives. Having a universal experience, providing that to my mom, who is a 60-year-old spec ed teacher, is really going to be the only way we get her logged in every day, right? It's the same thing when students go away for a semester and come back, right? That faculty member that never logs in, having a universal branded experience, regardless of the endpoint, is huge to get adoption across your user base. So I browse the same site, I see the same logos, I know this is where I need to be. Well, for me though, right, I'm a teacher. So when I go to put in my username, instead of getting prompted for WebAuthn, I'm actually texted, right, an SMS. And this is key when we talk about users that are maybe faculty, specifically teachers. We talk about how do we push out two-factor authentication. Well, with me as an administrator, right, I have WebAuthn, I have FIDO tokens. I can force my guys to download an app. When it comes to faculty members, you have to have flexibility. So one of the flexible options is to actually send you an SMS. You don't have to have a smartphone. All we have to have is your cell phone on record, and I can send you an SMS that you can use as a one-time password, right? The key here is that this is a part of rapid identity in your licensing. You don't pay per text message. You don't pay per email, right, that you send people. This is something that's just a part of the product and that I can deploy dynamically like we see here. Now, the difference is when I successfully provide that OTP, I get presented a uniquely different experience from what we saw as an administrator, right? I get presented my dashboard as a teacher at Hillside High School. I see my Mustang branding, and I see all of the applications that are really specific to my use case, my role, my location, right? Anything that a stakeholder would designate, this is what I get classified into, and this is the look and feel that I have. We'll notice that there's a lot more white space here. There's a lot less options, right, for you to do. This is something that is streamlined. It's meant for a teacher to go and interact with. The key here, right, is that I can come over here and I can perform single sign-on. I can get access, right, to any of my federated resources immediately without having to authenticate again, right? So this is really the key to single sign-on and federating your Google domain, your O365 domain, anything that can do SAML, OAuth, OpenID, WSFed, or CAS, you can integrate with Rapid Identity from a service provider level. So all the things that we see here, right, Henry can jump right into them, get access to his account immediately, and go about his day. This is the same experience again, whether I come from a browser, a Windows device with Rapid Identity Authentication client installed, a Chromebook that's federated against Rapid Identity, or even an iPad on iOS, right? So this is a universal experience that gets me there. The key here, though, and one of the big things that we think about when we push out these dashboards and we kind of force these people to go into these looks is, well, maybe Henry has more than one hat that he wears. It's a common thing that we deal with every day, right? This is part of our diverse user group. Is maybe there's a teacher that teaches at 2 campuses. Maybe there's a teacher that's also a parent of a student in our district. How do we facilitate that with these dashboards? And that is something that we can do with Rapid Identity and Universal Authentication Director as well. We can actually direct Henry right to his Hillside High School dashboard because that's his primary role. But let's say that maybe he's also a parent of a middle school student at Cherry Creek. Well, Henry can actually log in with the same account. He can have one authentication token, and he can gain access to not only his teacher account to facilitate his day-to-day activity, but he can also jump into a dashboard, maybe that's specific to parents, right? If this is something we want to provide, maybe alumni as well, we can have one account, one username, one authentication method, and you can get multiple experiences for one user out of these dashboards, right? So this is really where we see the next level of role-based experiences. Like Carter mentioned, we call these personas. And the key here is that I, as an end user, can have as many personas that need to be designated to me, and I can bounce between them effortlessly as long as I provide that first level of authentication, right? So this is the teacher, this is the faculty experience. This is where we've seen a lot of people fall in love with the use case of rapid identity. And this is really where I can tie it in to identity access management through these roles and different affiliations that may be tied to users, right? So the last dashboard that we're going to look at, and then we're going to come back and look about how you can set all this up, is from a student experience, right? So today we just had a teacher log into a dashboard that's tailored to them, but maybe we already have an existing dashboard system, right? Maybe we have a really huge deployment of Clever, and that's what our students use at specific campuses, right? Well, you can always use the rapid identity dashboard and click on Clever, but for some students, having that extra click is too much. Going to another dashboard confuses them, like Carter had said at the beginning. So how do we facilitate getting you authenticated securely against this universal IDP, but still to that dashboard that may be, completely third party? And that's where we'll look at our third experience here, right? And we're going to look at a Allen Elementary School student. So this is a student that is at one of our specific elementary schools. This elementary school heavily uses Clever. So I, as a district administrator, know that everyone's going to Clever here. So let's go ahead and point them straight there. So what I do is I say, hey, you come to the same login page, right, that I administrate from, that the faculty logs into, that everyone knows is the safe page, the safe URL. You put in your username, right? But your experience, right, is uniquely different. Now I'm an elementary school student, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select the things that I need for my pictograph login. I'm always hungry, so I have cheese, pizza, and a hamburger. And the key here is that as soon as I complete this authentication, I'm not presented a rapid identity dashboard. I'm actually directed to Clever. You got to love when the demo gods play with you here. Sorry, guys, I was logged in as Henry. We have to log out. Always fun. Okay. Isn't that what Chrome's Incognito is supposed to be for? I love that. It's just so what it looks like for me, right? Still hungry. And we'll see here that I get presented directly into my Clever dashboard. So for my experience as a student here, right, I actually go straight to the traditional dashboard that I've been using, that I know where all of my single sign-on applications and all of my Clever tools are. But I actually performed, right, that authentication against the rapid identity IDP, the same place where administrators and teachers perform that can be completely customized and tailored, right, to our group, our organization, and can also provide that self-service capability right there, right? So this is the three experiences that we really are seeing play out in environments, right? We're seeing that administrative experience where you're looking at more of a traditional console where you have a lot of buttons and tools. Then we're seeing a faculty experience where maybe you're putting on different hats to get to some streamlined dashboards. And then ultimately, we're seeing with Universal Authentication Director, the ability to do IDP initiated single sign-on, where you can direct someone straight to a federated partner like we see here with a Clever dashboard, right? So how do I accomplish that as an administrator? Is there a user interface to do all this? There absolutely is. And that's something where we see rapid identity really differentiate itself from other products out there. So we're going to jump back into the administrative point of view here, right? We're back into the console that I logged into with Touch ID, where I have access to an admin dashboard. And what I have access to here is something called configuration. Now I have the keys to the kingdom here, right? I'm a major stakeholder in our environment, but you could also provide access at a granular level to what we're about to look at. So if I want to provide the ability to make these dashboards to maybe campus admins or more local level administrators, I can absolutely do that as well and still restrict some of the bigger ticket items. The key here though is I jump straight to SSO portal, and we'll notice the first thing that we'll look at here is themes. Themes are the branding for this experience. So this is how I see the Hillside High School Mustang logo, right? This is how I see the title of it when we jump into his portal for Henry's point of view. This is how I really control that feel of that dashboard. Now, these themes can then be tied to personas, and personas are how I direct users based on their role to that end user experience. It's how I push someone to an admin dashboard. It's how I give Henry those two dashboards that he can switch between. And it's also how I push Manuel directly to Clever, right? So how do we present that to people? How do these dashboards work for Universal Authenticator? Well, if I'm going to make one maybe for Hillside High School teachers, right, as an example, the key here is that I give it a name. I can do role-based or attribute-based access control. So again, building upon lifecycle management, having true who has access, when do they have it, is that the correct level of access, really plays in to these single sign-on dashboards, because if I know that you are correctly assigned the role, I can easily give you a dashboard based off of a role that's tied to you. But I can also give you a dashboard maybe tied to an attribute, right? Maybe Don's in here, right? And we see Don as the account name. So Don specifically gets this dashboard for himself as well, right? I also have the ability to customize these dashboards. So I can say whether it's lighter, dark mode, comfy or compact, whether the icons are small, medium, or large. And then I can ultimately give end users the capability to do them themselves. So if I want to give maybe staff and faculty the ability to customize these dashboards a little bit more, but we want to lock it in for students, I can absolutely do that through my customization option here. Ultimately, then to display those applications to Henry when he logged in as a teacher, I select them from an application catalog here. I have the ability to move them up and down. I can require them as bookmarks, and I can even favorite them for you to maybe select or deselect yourself. Now, this is if I want to push people to a dashboard, right? This is a rapid identity controlled dashboard. This is what we saw with, again, Henry Hudson as a high school teacher, but also as a guardian to switch between his high school teacher persona dashboard and then also maybe his guardian dashboard, right? But how do we get Manuel directly to Clever, right? How do we say, as soon as you log into Rapid Identity, an IDP provider-based SSO is going to be launched and you are going to get straight into Clever? Well, the key is I have a persona here, right? Called out for Allen Elementary School because that's our big Clever use case in my district. And what we see here is that instead of doing any of the customization, like we saw with the previous personas, is I just have this enabled third-party portal selected. And now the key here is that I can then select any one of my federated service providers that are a part of my Rapid Identity tenant and push you directly to that dashboard, that login. And so when we see this, Clever is a great use case, ClassLink's a great use case, but it can really even extend beyond that. With Universal Authentication Director and Rapid Identity, I can actually push anyone directly to any federated service provider that I've established within Rapid Identity. So this is a huge, powerful tool that I can use a user interface to direct people straight to a resource. So we use maybe Google Workspace, right? I'm sending you straight to Google Docs or Google Mail. If we use O365, like Carter mentioned earlier, maybe we're sending you directly to Azure resources, right? Again, guys, the key here is that to drive adoption, to meet compliance in a lot of these use cases, I need to have an experience that is universal that I can push out to my user base. Being able to create these dashboards, designate what people see on them, ultimately where they go, is going to prove very useful in trying to get adoption accepted across your entire user base. So this is Universal Authentication Director. Again, this is where we see people leveraging it today. The other thing you have the capability to do with these dashboards, and we see here, is I also have the ability to push out announcements. So if you guys want to alert people, give them a heads up that school is closed, that there's going to be an enrollment period for student aid, I can actually push out announcements, right? And I can do it on a persona level. So if I have people in roles, if I have them designated through specific attributes, I can actually push out announcements to them based on that through these personas as well. So I'll go ahead and turn off the fire hose here. I'm sure, as everyone can tell, I'm very excited about what this provides as a product feature to really get MFA out there, and then ultimately the single sign-on and federation that accompanies it.
Well, Kevin, I have a couple questions here, because I know we've solved some issues for some customers with this platform. Enrollment. So I saw, Duo was one of the available methods that you can use there. Could you talk a little bit about enrollment and how that experience for that first-time user kind of works?
Yeah, that's a great question. So this is a big part of using authentication, right, and enrolling people in form factors. So we didn't really jump into true 2FA today, right? I used just our form factors so we could see those. And true NIST compliant login, we're always combining maybe something you have, like a token, right, or a text message, or something you are, like a fingerprint and touch ID like I provided. That's usually combined with a NIST compliant knowledge base authentication factor, like a password or a PIN, right? So the way I push out those policies and enforce them within Rapid Identity is, as an administrator, I have access to something called authentication policies. Just like most things within Rapid Identity and the user interface, it is policy driven. So as an administrator, I have the ability to create policies. We'll notice here, right, I've made ones just for us today to enforce things like pictograph on manual and things like an SMS for Henry. The key here, though, is that just like we saw with personas and how I can push out personas, is that I can designate, right, criteria to trigger authentication policy. So this means wherever you're coming from, as long as I interact with the Rapid Identity IDP, I can trigger authentication methods to be enforced based off of maybe your role, right? So maybe all the kids at Allen Elementary School do pictograph, right? But I could also do it by LDAP filters and attributes like we see here, right? So like we saw with Dawn, when Dawn gets the dashboard for the teachers, you can also see it here through these policies. The key is that I have a lot of flexibility, and I can also push out criteria by day of week, time of day, or source network. So I can say if you're coming off network or after hours, you do MFA, or maybe if you're coming from on campus, maybe you get automatically logged in using Windows credentials, right? These are all criteria that I can use singularly or in combination to enforce any combinations of the methods that we see here, right? So when we look at this with Rapid Identity, we talk about adoption. Like I mentioned earlier, this is a big part of it, is providing people options that they are comfortable with that still provide some level of security, right? And when we think about maybe security based off of a user's role or their potential impact, we can really start breaking down the options that we see here. One that you had called out, Don, right, was Duo. It's a huge use case, especially in higher ed, right? And the way Duo works with Rapid Identity is through a web or universal SDK is what it's called, API call. So the way it works for me, if I want to enforce Duo, I have an existing Duo deployment, right? So I'm using Duo today. I have it configured and people are using it for other use cases. I can actually plug it right into Rapid Identity by just coming over here, checking the box, and then designating the Duo configuration. Now, what is the Duo configuration? It's something that I have access to right here as an admin, and I can actually add in myself. All I need is the name, the integration, the secret key, and the host name for my Duo deployment, which you can really easily grab from the admin console. This allows you to plug, again, right into an existing Duo integration. You can have people that have already enrolled in Duo leverage the methods that they already do. And then ultimately you could have people enroll in Duo through that same screen, right? Duo is a really big use case. It's what we see a lot of people in higher ed use. The key here, though, is that with Duo, right, it is third-party licensing. It's something that maybe you have to go out and buy if you don't have. And if you do have it already, that's great, but maybe you don't intend to extend it to your entire user base because it's really expensive, right? So these other options that we see here are all things that come with rapid identity authentication. So these methods that we see here that I can enable, right? Maybe like a password if I want to have that level of complexity or that second factor, maybe things like a TOTP, right? These are all things that I can enable, and I can actually drag and drop in the order that I want them to be presented to users, right? So as an example, to kind of show you guys maybe what that's like, let's flip this around and say, instead of this policy being for manual to do pictograph, let's say it's Kevin's TOTP policy, right? What I can see here is that I have it set to the LDAP filter, right? All I have to do is change the username. I'll designate the authentication methods, right? TOTP and password, right? Hit save. Come over here, I can do my profile settings. What we'll do is I can select it too if I want to do it optionally. I'll reset it because maybe I already have one, right? And when we talk about inline enrollment, Don, because I think that's a huge part of people leveraging this and again, getting adoption, we'll notice that I have this policy, right? This is the first one for me. Let's make sure. TOTP and password. So when I come to log in, right? Well, actually, I'm gonna do this really quick, guys, so you guys can see a existing setup here. And we'll do it. Sorry, we're off the cuff now. Let's see. Let's go with this one. So I'll log out here. It's funny, I've gotten so used to using WebAuthn, I'm not sure what my password is for this environment. Yeah, let's see. Sorry, guys, this may be a bad use case for the attendees. Oh, there you go. Second time the charm. So what we see here, right, is I provide my password, I provide my knowledge-based authentication, but on the following screen, I am prompted for an inline enrollment, right? So since I pushed out an authentication policy that requires TOTP, I'm presented with an enrollment screen. I use Google Authenticator, right, for personal things, but the great thing about TOTP with Rapid Identity is that it is completely app agnostic. So as long as your app works with QR code-based enrollment or even potentially physical tokens that can have seed files derived from QR codes can actually be leveraged in this scenario. So I'm going to take a quick picture, right, of my QR code. I'm going to get an OTP, and then I'm going to put in that OTP before it expires. And we'll notice here, I hit go, right? I gain access to, again, my administrative user interface that's tailored for me based off of my role. And then now I ultimately have this TOTP assigned to me. So the next time I go to log in, right, I'm going to get prompted for that TOTP. If I ever need to reset it myself, I can do it right here. Maybe I get another device. You can also have administrators reset that for you. So that's really how inline enrollment works. It's how you can actually turn on these policies and have people the next time they come in, maybe they come back from a break, right? They immediately are enrolled in this and they're actually going about their day with a NIST compliant login like we just saw there.
Thank you, Kevin. I want to say this is the probably number 2 engagement that we have is the single sign-on coupled with some type of multi-factor authentication. It's the number 1 request that we've seen, over the last year is how do I solve my multi-factor authentication problems? And that choice that you make with your MFA is so critical in different schools because one size doesn't fit all. I can't do Duo, like you said, for every single student. It's cost prohibitive. But I may need that for my administrative team or my accounting team and my administrators, et cetera, to satisfy some type of requirement. But one size doesn't fit all. So we're constantly having to take a look at different solutions for different end users. And the pictograph for the K through 3 probably is the biggest example of that. We're not going to have them pulling out phones in class, right?
can't have them on phones. They usually are going to forget their password, right? Which is a big thing too. Pictographs, again, are something that we see. That's why I showed it today, is because you can use custom images. You could tailor how many they have to pick, right? So I picked 2 for manual, but I could pick 3 or as few as 1. And it's something that we've noticed the kids have a better chance of remembering, right? I think that's when we talk about keeping them logged in, preventing teachers from having to call in help desks or try and log them in, guessing a password. This is definitely a way to be more efficient than that.
And be secure. That balance of
Yeah.
security versus productivity is always something we always have to really balance. We cannot be one way or the other.
Yeah, Don, that's where coming back to education being unique as it pertains out in the technology space. So if you are an enterprise business, you have a top-down mandate to where IT can say these are the security protocols we're going to follow, and the CEO of the company can send this out and say, hey, you're going to do this or you don't have a job here. And
Right.
so it can force the compliance of everybody in the workforce. From an education perspective, the mandate is you need to be able to educate students. And so anything that gets in the way of that really is just a harbinger of doom for the IT squad. So you don't have that ability to just top down push things out. You have to be able to have those adoptions to drive adoption.
Exactly. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again here, and just if anybody has any questions that you'd like us to answer, happy to do that. We have just about 10 more minutes left, so I'd love to take a couple questions if anybody has any. So let me share my screen real quick. But I'm also going to show a poll while we're at it. If anybody is interested in a follow-up, go ahead and click yes or no. And then if you want to be included on our prize drawing, for those of you who've made it this far, we will select the winner after this. But being schools or government entities that are on here, not everybody can actually be eligible for a prize drawing. So if you want to be eligible for that, go ahead and fill out the survey. I'll give that another 10 seconds or so. And then we'll come back and we'll select the winner after that, and I'll email the winner later today. But if you have any questions, go ahead and dump them into the queue. Okay, I'm going to end the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, so thank you for those that went ahead and did the poll. We'll get back and let you know if you're the winner. Q&A is open. I do not see a question in there. I would like to mention, while we give it another minute, if anybody has a question they're thinking of, we do these implementations a couple different ways. We do these as project-based with the implementations. If you're a current customer, you're probably a managed customer through our co-management program, through what we call the primary engineer program. A lot of the things that we do with these implementations, they're not just something that happens over a 6-week time frame. That adoption and all those changes and the adding and the benefit of adding all the applications that you have takes time. Not only just the provision of them, but if you want to do the single sign-on and federation, that takes time. So we usually push customers to our primary engineer program, which is a year-long contract where you are assigned an engineer and they become part of your team to do this implementation. It's not something that just happens overnight. We'd all like that. Moving to the cloud, you guys, we've saved a lot of time moving into the cloud and using this as a SaaS option. But the implementation and the integration, there's a lot of work that goes into creating that great looking portal. And also a lot of decisions that have to be made by just outside of IT. So using that primary engineer program is a great way to get this implemented, get it up, get the value in there, and then start adding value by adding other systems. Because we've been to schools that have 50, 60 applications. It takes time to get that stuff implemented and integrated. But the benefit, as you guys can see,